What would you do if your husband brought his mistress to your funeral? Just imagine a church filled with 200 people in a mahogany casket holding a pregnant woman who died in a way that made no sense. Then the doors swing open.
How could you do
Her
this?
husband
You
walks
stole
in,
everything, Marcus!
holding hands with
Jessica,
the woman he
please,
was
I can
cheating with
explain.
for months.
It wasn't like that.
But here's
Let
the
go
secret
of me!
nobody
How
in that
dare
church
you do
knew.
This? I demand that you
The
release
wife in
me
that
right
coffin was
now!
no victim.
I have done
She was a
nothing wrong.
genius. Everyone thought she was just a simple school teacher making crafts for her students. In reality, she was quietly building a $47 million empire. While her husband was planning to take everything and disappear with his mistress, she was keeping a record of every single lie, every crime, and every betrayal. And she left a video she arranged to have played at her own funeral, designed to destroy everyone who ever thought she was weak. What you are about to hear is going to shock you. Please stay with me, because the final twist is something nobody could have predicted, not even me. This story is about Rachel Morrison, and it is the story of how a dead woman got the perfect revenge. This story will teach you a powerful lesson. Never underestimate a quiet woman. Never mistake her silence for weakness. And never believe that someone who seems powerless cannot become the most dangerous person in the room. If you have ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or told you were nothing without someone else, this story is for you. The mahogany coffin was at the front of St. Andrew's Church, a beautiful and tragic sight. It was surrounded by countless white lilies and the soft glow of candles, which made shadows dance on the polished wood. 200 guests sat in the old church pews. They were all dressed in black, their faces showing the kind of deep sadness that comes when someone dies too young. The air was heavy with the smell of flowers mixed with expensive perfume. But underneath it all was a feeling of complete and utter disbelief. And at the heart of everything, inside that gorgeous coffin that cost more than what most people earn in a year, was Rachel Morrison, a 32-year-old elementary school teacher. She was a loving friend, a mother-to-be, and now she was gone. I was standing in the third row from the front, holding a tissue that was already completely soaked. My black dress felt tight across my chest, as if the grief itself was a heavy weight pressing down on me. My name is Clare Bennett, and the woman in that coffin was more than just my friend. She was my sister in all the ways that count. We had been inseparable since we were 7 years old. For 25 years, she was the person I told all my secrets to, my partner through every good and bad time life gave us. A quarter century of friendship, of late-night whispers, of drying each other's tears and sharing endless laughter. We had phone calls that lasted all night and Sunday brunches where we thought we could fix the world with mimosas and pancakes. Now, all of that was gone, ending here in this cold stone church with its high ceilings and stained glass windows that seemed to mock our sorrow with their bright colors of hope. Rachel was 8 months pregnant when she died, carrying a little girl she was going to name Hope. The baby actually survived. She was delivered by an emergency C-section as her mother's life slipped away. She was just 4 pounds and 2 ounces of pure fight, lying in an incubator with no idea she would never meet the woman who already loved her more than anything, who sang to her every night through her belly, and who spent weeks choosing the perfect sunny yellow for her nursery. The doctors said it was due to complications. They used vague terms like an unexpected infection, rapid organ failure, and a sudden decline. They would just shake their heads and quietly say that sometimes these things just happen, that medicine doesn't have all the answers, and that they did everything they could. But I knew something they didn't. I knew that Rachel had been perfectly healthy throughout her entire pregnancy. I knew she had that special glow that expectant mothers have. I knew she was strong and full of life, planning a future that should have lasted for many, many more years. And I knew, with a certainty that felt like a rock in my stomach, that something was terribly wrong with how fast her health had failed. The priest was talking, his voice a soothing and practiced sound, as he quoted scripture to comfort the crowd. He talked about God having a plan, about eternal peace, and the promise of seeing loved ones again in heaven. I could barely hear him. My attention was locked on the coffin, on the arrangement of white roses on its lid, and on the framed picture next to it. It showed Rachel looking so happy and vibrant, smiling for the camera, with one hand on her pregnant stomach. That was the moment the heavy wooden doors at the back of the church creaked open. The sound echoed through the quiet sanctuary like a gunshot, stopping the priest mid-sentence. Every single person in the church turned around to see what caused the disturbance. The bright afternoon sun streamed in through the open doors, making it hard to see at first, creating silhouettes of two people. Marcus Morrison walked into his wife's funeral like he was attending a business meeting that he found slightly annoying. He was dressed in a charcoal gray suit that must have cost at least $3,000. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and he had the easy confidence of a man who, in his 35 years of life, had never been denied anything he wanted. He stood tall, walked slowly, and had an expression that could almost seem sad if you didn't look closely into his eyes. But it wasn't Marcus who made everyone in the room let out a collective gasp. It was the woman standing next to him. Jessica Crane strolled into that funeral, holding Marcus's hand, as if she had every right to be there. She acted like she belonged right by his side, as if she wasn't the other woman, the mistress, the person who destroyed a home by sleeping with another woman's husband while that woman was carrying his child. She was 28 years old, with that expensive kind of blonde hair that takes hours at a salon to perfect. She had a manufactured type of beauty that came from personal trainers, strict diets, and a skincare regimen that cost more than some people's car payments. Her black dress was clearly a designer brand, probably Valentino, tailored to flaunt her figure while trying to look appropriate for a funeral. Her high heels were red-soled Louboutins, and they clicked loudly on the marble floor with every step. The sound was disgusting in the otherwise silent and sacred church. I just stood there and watched her walk down the main aisle on the arm of my dead best friend's husband, and I felt a coldness spread through me. Behind me, I heard Rachel's mother make a sound I will never forget. Betty Johnson was 61 years old, a small woman who seemed even smaller because of all the hardships she had faced. She had worked double shifts at a diner near a truck stop in rural Tennessee for 30 years just so her daughter could have a better life. She had driven for 14 hours without stopping to get to this funeral, most likely in the same old Honda Civic she had owned since Rachel was a teenager. She had already buried her own mother and her husband, and now she was burying her only child. Through every tragedy, she always carried herself with a quiet dignity and grace that impressed everyone who knew her. But seeing her son-in-law walk into her daughter's funeral with his mistress just broke something inside Betty Johnson. She let out a sound like a wounded animal, a cry of pure pain that was louder than all the whispers and gasps, and then her legs gave out from under her. I managed to catch her right before she hit the floor, holding her frail body in my arms. I could feel her shaking with sobs she couldn't hold back. In that moment, I learned something very important. Standing there in that church, holding a grieving mother, while her daughter's betrayer proudly walked his mistress past the coffin. When a person shows you their true self during the worst possible moment, a moment when common human decency should be the absolute minimum, you should believe them. Marcus wasn't being cruel because of his grief. This wasn't because of shock or confusion or some twisted way of seeking comfort. This was Marcus Morrison finally taking off the mask he had worn for years. He was finally showing his real face to everyone who had ever mistakenly thought he was a good person. I have seen some terrible behavior in my life. I have seen people show their true colors in tough situations, but I have never, ever seen someone do it while wearing a $3,000 suit at his pregnant wife's funeral, with his mistress on his arm and a slight smile on his face. Marcus led Jessica to the very front row of the church, to the seats that were meant for the family. He took them to the places of honor right in front of the coffin that held the woman he had promised to love and honor for the rest of his life. He sat down without even looking at Betty, without a single glance at the woman who had raised the wife he was now burying. Jessica sat down next to him, crossing her legs at the ankle as if she were at a fancy lunch. Her expression was carefully blank, except for the tiny smile playing on her lips. The whispering started almost immediately, spreading through the rows of people like a fire in a dry field. I saw people taking out their phones from their bags and pockets, even though it was a funeral. I saw them openly recording, holding their screens at angles they must have thought were sneaky. By the time Marcus sat down, I was sure that the whole disgraceful scene was already spreading all over the internet. The gossip was already flying across social media, through text messages, and in hushed whispers, even as Rachel's coffin sat cold just 20 feet away. The priest had gone silent. He just stood at the pulpit, looking completely lost, his speech about heaven and God's plan now feeling totally hollow because of the drama unfolding right in front of him. For what felt like an eternity, nobody moved. The air in the church was so heavy with tension, I could almost taste it, like a sour mix of anger, shock, and something else that felt strangely like excitement. That is when the lawyer, Thomas Whitmore, got to his feet. I had met him only once, 3 days before, when he had summoned me to his office to tell me things about Rachel that I never knew. These secrets made me wonder if I ever really knew my best friend at all, and I realized she had been playing a game none of us understood, and the final moves were about to be revealed. He was 58 years old and had that classic, wealthy Connecticut look, with silver hair brushed back from a high forehead and piercing blue eyes that took in everything but gave away nothing. He had spent 30 years as a corporate attorney before switching to estate law, and he carried the quiet confidence of a man who had seen everything and was surprised by nothing. He walked toward the front of the church with steady, deliberate steps, his face set in a serious expression. The priest wordlessly stepped aside, giving the podium to this man who was not on the program. "Ladies and gentlemen," Whitmore said, and his voice filled the entire church without him needing to shout. Something in his tone made people sit up and pay attention. The whispers faded away, and it even made Marcus look up from his phone with the first flicker of worry I had seen on his face all day. "Before this service ends, I have been instructed by Rachel to read her last will and testament here today, in front of all the people she held dear." He took a breath, his eyes scanning the crowd before settling on Marcus and Jessica in the front pew. His next words were spoken softly, but they landed like punches. "And everyone who betrayed her." Marcus's smug posture changed, just slightly. Next to him, Jessica's perfectly painted nails dug into his arm, her knuckles turning white. Whitmore pulled a large, thick envelope from his jacket pocket, the official kind that lawyers use. He held it high for everyone to see before he slowly and carefully started to break the wax seal. I did not understand what was happening back then. I had no idea what Rachel had been plotting, what secrets she was hiding, or what kind of empire she had been quietly building, while we all just saw a nice elementary school teacher who made worksheets about butterflies. But as I stood in that church and watched the blood drain from Marcus Morrison's face While the attorney got ready to read his dead wife's will, I started to understand something huge. Rachel knew. She knew all about the affair, the lies, and everything that had been done to her behind her back. But she did not just accept her fate or curl up and wither away like a poor victim. She got ready. I watched Marcus squirm in his seat as 200 pairs of eyes stared at him with pure disgust. And I thought about what none of them knew, what even I had only learned 3 days ago. Rachel used the final months of her life to build an elaborate trap, and every single person who had ever wronged her, who had ever underestimated her, who had ever looked at her sweet face and saw only weakness, had just walked right into it. To truly grasp how we got to this point, with my best friend gone and her husband's mistress sitting in the family section as if she had every right to be there, I need to take you back. We have to go back before the cheating, before the secrets and the careful plans made in the dark, back to the start of a love story that was destined to end in both heartbreak and victory. Rachel Ann Johnson was raised in a trailer park in a small town in the middle of nowhere, Tennessee. It was the kind of place that is not on any maps, a place that everyone who lives there dreams of leaving. Her mother, Betty, worked back-to-back shifts at a roadside diner. She would get home at 3 in the morning, smelling like old coffee and fried food, with her feet aching and her back sore. But she always had a warm smile for her daughter. A father was never part of the story. Betty never mentioned him, and Rachel quickly learned it was a topic to avoid. What Rachel did possess was a sharp mind, a blazing intelligence that her teachers saw right away. And it made her stand out from the other kids in their underfunded school system. It made the guidance counselors marvel and say things like, "That girl could really make something of herself if she just gets a fair shot." Betty Johnson was going to make sure her daughter got that shot. She picked up extra shifts any time she could. She cleaned houses for the rich families on the nice side of town. She saved every single dollar that was not for basic survival, stuffing cash into old coffee cans, under the mattress, and into a bank account she refused to touch, no matter how bad things got. When Rachel was 17 years old, she won a full scholarship to the University of Virginia. She broke down in tears when she read the acceptance letter. Betty cried too, standing there in their cramped kitchen, holding her daughter's entire future in her hands, realizing all those years of hard work had finally paid off. Rachel showed up to college with just 2 suitcases, $300 in her pocket, and a fierce drive to make it. That was almost scary. She held down 3 different jobs while she was at UVA. She was a waitress at a local diner, serving bratty college kids who never tipped well, and old-timers who barely noticed she was there. She tutored other students who were failing economics and business, subjects she had learned on her own from library books and online videos. On weekends, she cleaned dorms, scrubbing toilets, and making beds for students who would never bother to learn her name. Despite all of that, she kept a perfect 4.0 grade point average. She was on the dean's list every single semester. She graduated with top honors and earned the deep respect of all her professors. It was there that she first met Marcus Morrison. He was the complete opposite of Rachel. He was wealthy while she was poor. He had connections while she knew no one. And he was confident in a way that only people who have never faced a real struggle can be. His family's fortune went back for generations. It was old Connecticut money, the kind made from smart investments, big inheritances, and the type of deals made at exclusive country clubs and on fancy yachts. Marcus was failing his economics course when the university assigned Rachel to be his tutor. He strolled into their first meeting 20 minutes late, wearing a polo shirt that cost more than everything Rachel owned, and he looked at her like she was an employee. Honestly, she should have turned around and left right then. Looking back on it now, with everything I know, I can see all the warning signs that Rachel either did not see or chose to ignore. The casual way he acted like his time was more important than hers. The way his eyes glanced over her laptop, her clothes, her shoes. You could almost see him adding up her value in his head and deciding she was not enough. But a man like Marcus Morrison did not get where he was without knowing how to manipulate people. He saw something in Rachel during that first session. Maybe he was drawn to her intelligence, or maybe it was her natural beauty, the kind that did not require designer labels or a lot of makeup to be noticed. Or perhaps it was something more cynical. Maybe he saw a young woman who had fought for everything her whole life and figured she would be grateful for any attention he decided to give her. So he switched his approach. He began arriving on time for their sessions. He would bring her a coffee, and he remembered exactly how she liked it after being told only once. He started asking about her life, her background, and what she hoped to do in the future. And he would listen to her answers, seeming to be genuinely captivated. He pursued her with everything he had. He would show up at the diner where she worked and just order a coffee he never drank, only so he could watch her work. He sent massive bouquets of flowers to her small apartment, the kind that must have cost a fortune. He wrote her little notes that were surprisingly heartfelt for a guy like him. Model, a man who had everything in his privileged life handed to him. At first, Rachel pushed back. She was not a fool. She understood they were from completely different worlds and knew his family would never approve of a waitress's daughter. She knew fairy tales were just for kids and that happy endings belonged to people who never had to stress about making rent. But Marcus was persistent. He was charming. He was incredibly good at telling her exactly what she longed to hear. He told her one night, "I will never be like those people," after she finally admitted why she kept him at a distance. "The rich kids who look down on everyone else, that is not me, Rachel. I love you for who you are, not for where you come from. Your past does not matter to me." And she fell for it. God help her. She actually believed him. They were married 5 years later at his family's country club in Greenwich, Connecticut. I was her maid of honor. I stood right next to my best friend, wearing a dress I had found on sale and fixed up myself, just watching her face shine with a happiness that made my own heart ache with joy for her. Did you know Rachel made her own wedding dress? She designed it and sewed every stitch by hand over 6 months. She did it because Diana Morrison, Marcus's mother, refused to pay for a gown for someone she called the help. I overheard Diana say it, not realizing I was standing right around the corner, listening to every toxic word. "Trailer trash does not deserve Vera Wang," she said. "No matter how much perfume you spray on it, trash is still trash." I really should have told Rachel. I have replayed that moment in my head 1,000 times since, wondering if things might have turned out differently if I had just opened my mouth and told her the truth. But she looked so unbelievably happy that day, standing at the altar in that beautiful homemade dress with flowers woven into her hair, saying her vows to a man she loved with every piece of her heart. I just could not bring myself to ruin that for her. Maybe that makes me a coward. Maybe it makes me partly responsible for everything that came after. I have had a lot of time to think about it, and I still do not have the answer. The wedding reception was both beautiful and awful at the same time. It was beautiful because Rachel was absolutely glowing. The venue was breathtaking, and for a few hours, it truly felt like love could overcome the huge gap between their two worlds. It was terrible because I watched Diana Morrison move through the crowd, whispering venom into every ear, making sure everyone knew exactly what she thought of her brand new daughter-in-law. "Give it 5 years," I heard Diana tell a woman dripping in diamonds, her voice just loud enough for me to hear. "Trailer park is trailer park. The novelty will wear off, and Marcus will remember the values he was raised with." 5 years. That was Diana's prediction. She was wrong by 3 years. The first 2 years of their marriage seemed good, at least from the outside. Rachel and Marcus moved into a gorgeous apartment on the Upper East Side of Manhattan. He began working at a top investment banking firm. She found a job teaching third grade at a private school in the city, shaping young minds and coming home with stories about her students that made her entire face light up. Then Rachel found out about Marcus's gambling habit. He had lost $50,000 at a casino in Atlantic City. $50,000 in one weekend. It was money they did not have, money he had charged against their joint credit cards, and a loan he took out in both of their names without her knowledge. He cried when she confronted him. They looked like real tears. He dropped to his knees in their living room and begged her to forgive him. He swore it was a one-time mistake and promised it would never happen again. He said all the things people say when they are caught, desperate, and not quite ready to face their problems. Rachel used her inheritance to pay off his debts. Her grandmother had worked as a housekeeper for 50 years, cleaning toilets and scrubbing floors for wealthy families who likely never even bothered to learn her name. When she passed away, she left Rachel $50,000, every single penny she had saved over a lifetime of backbreaking work. Rachel gave all of it to Marcus without a second thought, with no resentment because she loved him. She believed in their marriage and thought that was what a good wife was supposed to do. I told her she was out of her mind. We were sitting in my little apartment in Queens, drinking wine from coffee mugs, because I had broken all my wine glasses during a movie night. I looked her right in the eye and said something I remember perfectly to this day. "Girl, the only thing you should be betting on is whether he remembers your anniversary, not your retirement fund, not your grandmother's life savings, and definitely not your entire financial future." She just laughed and told me I worried too much. She said Marcus had learned his lesson. She insisted that every marriage goes through rough patches, and this was just one of theirs. I truly wanted to believe her. I really did. Around that same time, Rachel started what she called a little hobby. She had been creating some teaching materials for her own classroom. Things like lesson plans, worksheets, and activities that her students really enjoyed. A coworker suggested she try selling them online on a platform called Teachers Pay Teachers, and later on, Etsy. "Just for fun," Rachel said. "A little extra money, maybe enough to pay for a vacation one day." Marcus was completely dismissive of the idea. He came home one afternoon while Rachel was on her laptop, designing a lesson about butterflies and their life cycles. He looked over her shoulder with a smirk that made my fists clench when Rachel told me the story later. "That is adorable, honey," he said. "You stick to teaching. Leave the business stuff to me." Rachel just smiled and nodded and went right back to her work. But I knew my best friend. I knew her better than anyone else in the world, or so I thought. I saw something flicker in her eyes when she told me that story. A spark of something I had never seen in her before. It was not hurt, or disappointment, or even acceptance. It was something sharper, something colder. It almost looked like she was calculating. Looking back now, I believe that was the exact moment everything began to shift. It was the moment Rachel stopped being the naive girl from Tennessee who believed in happily ever afters and started turning into someone else completely. She became patient. She became strategic. She became dangerous. But I did not get it back then. I did not see what was truly happening behind my best friend's sweet smile and her kind personality. I thought she was just coping with a bad situation. I thought she was adjusting. I thought she was doing what women have done for centuries when they find themselves stuck in difficult marriages with no easy way out. I had no idea she was secretly building an empire. 6 months before the funeral, Rachel was 6 months pregnant and looked more beautiful than I had ever seen her. Pregnancy agreed with her. It defied all the horror stories other women tell about swollen ankles, constant morning sickness, and skin that cannot decide if it wants to glow or break out. She was simply luminous, soft around the edges in the most perfect way, with one hand always resting on her belly, as if she were protecting something incredibly precious. And of course, she was. We met up for lunch on a Thursday in early spring. We went to a small cafe in Brooklyn that served the kind of expensive avocado toast that Instagram influencers only pretend to eat. Rachel was already there when I walked in, sitting at a table by the window. Sunlight was streaming across her face, making her look like a Renaissance painting of a perfect mother-to-be. But something was off. I could see it the second I sat down. There was a tightness around her eyes that her smile could not quite erase, and a tension in her shoulders that told me she was having sleepless nights and making hard choices. Tell me, I said, skipping the small talk. We knew each other too well for that. Rachel took a long, deep breath. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a credit card statement. I found this last week, she said. Look at the charges, the third line from the bottom. I looked. It was a jewelry store, Tiffany and Company, with a charge for $4,300. He bought me jewelry, Rachel said, her voice completely flat. Except he never gave me any jewelry. No necklace, no earrings, no bracelet, nothing. Maybe it is a surprise, I suggested, but even as the words came out, I knew how weak they sounded. Maybe he is just waiting for a special occasion. Rachel just shook her head. I checked our closet, his drawers, and his office at home. There is no jewelry box hidden anywhere. There is no receipt for a future pickup. Nothing. So where did $4,000 worth of Tiffany jewelry go? Rachel's eyes met mine, and what I saw in them made my stomach drop. It was not surprise or confusion or even anger. It was resignation. It was as if she already knew the answer deep down and was just waiting for the proof to finally appear. That is what I need to find out, she said. She did not confront Marcus about it right away. I learned that was not Rachel's style anymore. She had spent too many years watching her mother handle difficult situations with cleverness and strategy. She had learned that knowledge is power, and that the person who acts first is not always the one who wins in the end. Instead, she hired a private investigator. His name was Mike Callahan, a retired New York Police Department detective who specialized in what he gently called domestic surveillance. Rachel paid him with the money from her teaching materials business, which she told me was doing pretty well these days. I did not think much about that comment at the time. Pretty well could mean anything, like a few $100s a month, just enough to cover the investigator's fee without touching the household accounts that Marcus watched like a hawk. I was about to learn the true meaning of the phrase, pretty well. The pictures arrived less than a week later. Rachel phoned me on a Wednesday night, her voice unnaturally stable, the kind of calm that comes from holding yourself together with pure willpower. She asked if I could come over, explaining that Marcus was working late and she needed me to see something. I rode the subway to her Upper East Side apartment, a stunning place I had always secretly admired for its high ceilings and elegant crown moldings. When she opened the door, her eyes were rimmed with red, and she was clutching a manila envelope to her chest as if it held a venomous snake. It might as well have. With hands that shook, she laid the photos out on her dining room table. They showed Marcus with a blonde woman at a restaurant in Tribeca, their faces inches apart in conversation. Another picture showed his hand resting on top of hers on the pristine white tablecloth. Then there was Marcus with the same woman, checking into a boutique hotel in Soho, their arms wrapped around each other's waists. The last photos showed Marcus and the woman on a beach, which the geotag identified as Martha's Vineyard, strolling hand in hand by the ocean like a couple on their honeymoon. The woman was Jessica Crane, a 28-year-old junior associate at Marcus's investment firm. She had 87,000 followers on Instagram, where she shared perfectly staged photos of a luxurious lifestyle. I suddenly understood that my best friend's husband was paying for it all. I asked how long it had been going on, even though I was not sure I could handle the answer. The private investigator believes it has been at least 8 months, Rachel said, possibly longer. It started before I was pregnant, maybe even before we knew there was going to be a baby. We sat there in silence for a long time, the photographs scattered between us like evidence from a crime scene, which, in a way, they were. "What will you do now?" I asked. Rachel's expression hardened. "I'm going to think," she said. "I'm going to make a plan. And then, when I finally make my move, I will be prepared for anything that happens." She waited another full week before she confronted Marcus. She used that time to get ready, but I had no idea just how extensive her preparations were, or what they were for. When she finally mentioned the affair, they were in the kitchen of their gorgeous apartment. Rachel was composed and in control. She held the photographs in her hand and asked a very simple question. "How long has this been happening?" Marcus made no attempt to deny it. He offered no apology. He did not get on his knees and plead for forgiveness the way he had when she found out about his gambling addiction. Instead, he launched an attack. "You have been so boring ever since you got pregnant," he said, and every single word felt like a physical blow. "The only things you talk about are the baby, colors for the nursery, and finding pediatricians. You go on and on about which stroller we should buy. And it is draining, Rachel. When I get home from work, I need to be with someone who can hold a conversation about something other than the symptoms of her pregnancy." Rachel just stood there, 6 months pregnant, one hand instinctively moving to protect her belly as she took in every cruel word. "Jessica understands the kind of pressure I am under," Marcus went on. "She actually appreciates what I do for a living. She does not complain about me coming home late for dinner or spending too much time at the office. She is supportive, and she is exciting. She is everything you were before you turned into this incubator. Incubator." He had just called his pregnant wife an incubator, saying it as casually as someone might comment on the rain. But Marcus was not done. It seemed a deep well of cruelty had been building inside him for years, held in check by the thinnest layer of decency he possessed. Now, that poison was spilling out of him. "And what are you going to do about it anyway?" he sneered. "Are you going to leave me? On what money? You have absolutely nothing without me, Rachel. Your teacher's salary would not even cover the rent for a tiny studio in this city. And that little craft business of yours, selling lesson plans online, please, that is a hobby, not a real source of income." He moved toward her, towering over her, and using his physical presence to intimidate her. "Your mother was a waitress at some roadside diner, and you are exactly like her. You are a nobody, a charity case I rescued. I pulled you out of that trailer park, and I gave you a life you could never have dreamed of on your own. Everything you have, everything you are, is because of me." His voice dropped to a whisper, which was somehow more menacing than if he had been yelling. "Do you have any idea what will happen if you try to divorce me? I will ruin you. You will lose this apartment. You will lose access to our bank accounts, and you will lose the baby. My family uses the best lawyers in all of New York, people who have been working for the Morrison family since long before you were born. Your family has absolutely nothing. They have no money, no influence, and no power. You would waste years of your life fighting me in court, and when it was all over, you would have nothing left. You would end up exactly where you started, broke, all alone, and living in some miserable apartment. You would only see our daughter on weekends, and that is only if you get lucky. Is that really the life you want? Is that what you want for our child? Rachel said nothing. She couldn't speak. Her voice was gone, completely stolen by the depth of his cruelty. It was stolen by the sudden, horrible truth that the man she married, the man she had loved and given everything for, had never really been real. After he left, for the night, to be with Jessica, she drove to a parking garage on Fifth Avenue. She just sat there in her car for 2 hours and cried until there was nothing left to cry. Her eyes were swollen shut. Her throat felt raw, and her hands ached from how hard she was gripping the steering wheel. She called me from inside that garage, sobbing so uncontrollably that I could barely make out what she was saying. My first instinct was to get in my car and drive to Manhattan to hold her and tell her it would all be okay, but she refused to let me come. She told me she had to think. She said she had to decide on her next move. That day taught me something important, a lesson that has stuck with me forever. When a man tells you that you are nothing without him, he is not actually making a threat. He is giving you a confession. He is telling you about his deepest fear, the one that keeps him up at night, the one truth he can never bring himself to face. He is terrified that you are going to figure out that he is the one who is nothing without you. He is afraid that all of his money, power, and connections are worthless if you choose to leave him. He has built his entire identity on making you feel small. And if you ever stood up to your full potential, he would be exposed as the pathetic, insecure little man he truly is. After those 2 hours in the parking garage, Rachel wiped away her tears. She took out her phone and dialed a number I had never seen before. "Tom?" she said, her voice now firm and cold in a way that sent a chill through me. When she told me about it later, "It is Rachel. I believe it is time. Set everything into motion." That was the moment I discovered the truth about my best friend. It was a secret she had kept hidden for 6 years, quietly building something incredible, while everyone, including me, saw only a sweet teacher who sold worksheets with pictures of butterflies on them. Her business selling teaching materials was not just a hobby. It was not something that helped pay for a vacation now and then, or a fancy dinner. It was a $47 million corporation called EduSpark Digital, and it was the biggest independent teacher resource platform in the entire United States. The company had hundreds of thousands of subscribers. It had partnerships with school districts all over the country, and it had multiple revenue streams from subscriptions, licensing deals, and corporate training programs. Rachel had constructed the entire thing by herself, piece by piece, working in the early mornings and late at night while Marcus assumed she was grading homework or preparing her lessons. She had incorporated the business in Delaware long before they were married, and she had placed everything into an irrevocable trust that her husband had no legal access to. She had hired a team of employees, negotiated major contracts, and made brilliant strategic moves that transformed her small hobby into an empire. And Marcus knew nothing about it, not a single thing. He believed she earned about $200 a month from her worksheets. He believed she was nothing without him. He believed he held all the power in their marriage. He thought he could bully her with threats of poverty and custody battles, certain that she had no other option but to obey. He was about to find out just how mistaken he was. 3 days after her confrontation with Marcus, Rachel had a meeting with her attorney, Thomas Whitmore. They met in a small cafe in Brooklyn that she had picked for one reason. No one from their Upper East Side social scene would ever be caught dead there. I was with her because she insisted. She said she needed a witness. Someone she trusted completely who could confirm that every action she was about to take was legal, documented, and completely legitimate. Tom Whitmore had been friends with Rachel's mother for many years. He had worked on a case near Betty's Diner a long time ago, back when he was a young prosecutor learning the ropes by handling small-town crimes. Betty had kept him supplied with coffee and pie and had listened to him complain about the endless hours and the difficult defendants, and the two had struck up an unusual friendship that had endured all these years. When Rachel had needed legal guidance on how to start her business, she had called Tom. When she had needed help structuring her company to shield it from a husband she was already starting to distrust, she had called Tom. And when she finally understood that her marriage was a foundation of lies and that she had to protect herself and her unborn child, she had called Tom. He laid out the documents on the cafe table with the smooth efficiency of a man who had handled situations like this countless times. Still, I could see a definite spark of satisfaction in his eyes as he detailed what Rachel had created. "The company is secured in an irrevocable trust," he explained, his voice low, even though we were in a private corner booth. "It was created before your marriage and was funded solely with money that you earned on your own. Marcus has absolutely no legal right to any of it. He cannot access the funds, he cannot dissolve the trust, and he cannot even know about its existence, unless you are the one who tells him." He tapped a different file. This one contains all the records of his activities, his gambling losses, his financial deception, and solid proof of the affair, including times, places, and photographs. It lists every single lie he has told you, every promise he has failed to keep, and every instance he has dipped into your joint bank accounts without your permission or even your knowledge. I just stared at the thick stack of papers, at the incredible amount of proof my best friend had gathered, while none of us had any idea. "How long have you been collecting all of this?" "6 years, Rachel replied, her voice completely steady. "It started the very first time I discovered he was gambling. I knew in my gut that something was seriously wrong, even if I tried to deny it to myself. So I began keeping a file, just to be safe. Just to be safe." She had been a wife for 8 years, and for 6 of those years, she had been secretly and systematically compiling a case against the man she married. She was preparing for a day she hoped would never happen, but she was far too intelligent not to be ready for it. "What is the plan now?" I asked. "Now, we are patient," Tom said. "Rachel has to have the baby safely first. We must ensure the child's future is legally protected before we take any action. And we must also guarantee that when we do move forward, Marcus has absolutely no way out, no secret funds, no legal workarounds, and no chance to turn this situation against Rachel." Rachel nodded in agreement, her hand resting on her pregnant belly. "And I found something else," she added, "something that completely changes the game." She then laid out the Costa Rica plan. Marcus was getting ready to empty their shared accounts right after the baby was born. He had already booked plane tickets for himself and for Jessica. His goal was to grab every dollar he could and flee to a country that does not extradite, leaving Rachel with a newborn child and a massive pile of debt. He has been siphoning money for months, Rachel explained, in small transfers that were designed not to raise any red flags. I only discovered it because I have been watching our bank accounts like a hawk. Then she smiled, but it was not a friendly smile. It was the grin of a chess grandmaster who just watched their opponent walk straight into a checkmate. He has no idea that I know, she said. He is completely unaware that I have been a dozen moves ahead of him for years. He assumes I am naive. He assumes I am helpless. He assumes I have run out of options. That will be his greatest mistake. I still remember leaving that cafe with a whirlwind of feelings in my stomach. I felt pride for my friend, who had just shown more courage and strategic brilliance than anyone I had ever met. I felt fear for the storm that was coming, for the fight that was about to begin. And I felt something else too, something I did not have a name for at that time. Oh, perhaps it was the realization that the woman I thought I knew, my kind-hearted Rachel, who teared up at commercials, adopted stray animals, and created lesson plans about butterflies, had also been secretly building a $47 million empire while her husband believed she was just playing the role of a housewife. Record everything, she told me as we walked toward the subway station. That was her final piece of advice, the wisdom she had gained from 6 years of surviving a marriage to a man who would have gladly destroyed her. Save screenshots, make audio recordings, keep bank statements. When you are in a fight with someone who has more power, information is the only weapon you have. Build up your evidence, Claire. You never know when you will have to use it. I thought it was solid advice back then, the kind of thing you hear and agree with, tucking it away in your mind without ever thinking you will need it. I had no clue how soon those words would become my own lifeline. The weeks that came after were filled with tension and anticipation. Rachel played her role to perfection. She was the devoted, pregnant wife who did not suspect a thing, who spent her time worrying about nursery decorations and lists of baby names, all while her husband continued his affair with more and more boldness. She smiled when Marcus got home, late reeking of Jessica's perfume. She nodded understandingly when he claimed his weekend trips were unavoidable work emergencies. She waited, she watched, and she documented it all. She called me one afternoon, her voice filled with an excitement she could barely hold back. I have his entire escape plan, every single detail. The offshore accounts in the Caymans, the tickets for Costa Rica, the phony passport he had made for himself. A phony passport. It was clear he had been setting this up for quite some time, some longer than I had even guessed. He has a complete second identity created, ready to launch the second things get difficult for him here. She laughed then, and it was the pure sound of victory. He is completely unaware that I have copies of every document. He believes his secret email is secure because he chose a password he thought I would never be able to figure out. He does not realize I installed a keylogging program on his laptop 3 years ago. Good heavens, Rachel. I know, she said, sounding almost giddy with triumph. I realize it sounds extreme, but you need to see it from my perspective, Claire. I have lived with this man for 8 years. I know exactly what he is capable of. And I understood from the very beginning that if our marriage ever turned sour, I needed to have an insurance policy. What are you going to do with all this evidence? Not a thing, for now. I am going to wait until Hope is born, until she is safe, healthy, and protected. And after that, I am going to burn his entire world to the ground. It was the first time she had ever said the baby's name to me, Hope. She was naming her little girl Hope, and in that moment, in spite of everything, I truly believed that it was all going to be okay. I was sure that Rachel had planned for every contingency, that she was going to come out on top. I should have known better. I should have remembered that real life does not follow a script, that even the most carefully constructed plans can be shattered by events that no one could ever see coming. But I was not aware of what was about to happen. None of us were. 3 terrible things happened in the space of just 2 weeks, one right after the other, like a line of dominoes set up by a cruel hand. Each event was a disaster by itself, but together, they nearly ruined everything Rachel had spent years building. The first catastrophe came without any warning. Rachel was at Jefferson Elementary School, speaking to a classroom of parents during a standard meeting about their children's reading abilities. She was in the middle of describing how much one struggling student had improved when she felt a sudden, sharp pain shoot through her belly. It was followed by a sudden gush of warmth down her legs. She glanced down and saw red spreading across the tile floor. The next several hours were a chaotic blur of sirens, hospital hallways, and doctors speaking in grim, urgent voices. An emergency cesarean section at 32 weeks. The baby was dangerously premature. The placenta had torn away. They had to operate that instant or they would lose them both. Hope Morrison entered the world at 4:15 in the afternoon on a rainy Thursday in September, weighing 4 pounds and 2 ounces of pure fight. She was immediately taken to the neonatal intensive care unit, where tubes and monitors would keep her alive, while her tiny body fought to learn what nature had not given her enough time to master. Rachel barely survived the surgery. She lost a shocking amount of blood, and her blood pressure plummeted so low that her doctors were not certain she would last through the night. But she did, because Rachel was never a person who gave up, and because she had far too much left to do to let go now. She finally woke up in a hospital bed 3 days later, feeling as weak as a newborn, her body one big collection of pain and exhaustion. The very first thing she asked for was hope. The second thing she asked for was her phone. She was powerless to carry out her plan from a hospital bed. She could not meet with Tom Whitmore, or keep an eye on Marcus's accounts, or finalize the legal papers that were meant to protect her daughter. Every single day she spent in recovery was another day for Marcus to possibly find out what she had been working on, to find some way to reverse the situation, to escape to Costa Rica before she had the power to stop him. I visited her every single day, taking her magazines she never looked at and smoothies she could barely sip. I watched her get more and more stressed as her body refused to heal on her schedule. She was supposed to be in command right now. She was supposed to be strong. Instead, she was stuck in a hospital bed, at the mercy of doctors and nurses, and a husband whose visits were rare and always brief. That first catastrophe was the loss of her time, her strength, and her control. The second disaster arrived 3 days later, and it was a visitor Rachel never saw coming. Diana Morrison walked into the hospital room with a flower bouquet and a cashmere baby blanket, wearing an outfit of casual elegance that likely cost more than I earn in a month. She pressed a kiss to Rachel's cheek with lips that had never known genuine warmth, and then settled into a chair, as if she planned to be there for a long time. "I am here to help," Diana announced, her voice as sweet as poison. "Marcus is just so swamped with work, and you need someone to take care of you while you get better. We are family, after all." Rachel was too drained to put up a fight, too exhausted to see the quick, hungry glances Diana shot toward her phone on the nightstand and her laptop in the bag near the window. She was too medicated to recognize the predator hiding in plain sight. When I got to the hospital later that afternoon to see Rachel, I was carrying a bag filled with her favorite cookies and a new book I thought she would like. I gently pushed her door open, figuring I would find her resting alone or with a nurse doing a routine check. Instead, I saw Diana Morrison leaning over Rachel's bedside table. She had Rachel's phone in her hands and was scrolling through it with fierce concentration. Rachel was fast asleep, oblivious. The machines next to her bed beeped in a steady rhythm, delivering the medicine that kept her sedated so her body could heal. She had absolutely no clue what was unfolding just 3 feet from where she lay unconscious. "Diana," I said, and my voice was sharp enough to cut through the quiet room. She snapped her head up, and for a split second I saw a flash of triumph in her eyes, the look of a hunter that has finally trapped its prey. Just as quickly, it vanished, replaced by a friendly smile and an innocent look that would have fooled anyone not paying close attention. "Claire, honey, I was just making sure Rachel hadn't received any urgent messages. You know how much she worries about that little business she runs." She placed the phone back on the table and calmly gathered her belongings. "I have to get going, but I will be back in the morning. Please make sure she rests up." She breezed out of the room without a hint of guilt, leaving behind the faint smell of expensive perfume and a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach that something awful had just occurred. The moment Diana left, I grabbed Rachel's phone. I didn't have her password, but the lock screen showed the recently used apps, email, notes, and documents, all opened within the past hour. I shook Rachel awake and explained everything. As I spoke, the color drained from her face. Her hands were shaking when she took the phone from me and looked through the history, confirming every app Diana had opened. There were emails concerning the divorce, texts to Tom Whitmore, and files that mentioned Edu Spark and its $47 million valuation. "She knows," Rachel whispered, her voice barely audible. "She knows all of it." That night, Diana made a call to Marcus. It was only later, when all the terrible pieces came together, that we learned what she revealed to him. She told him about Rachel's secret company, the divorce papers she was having drawn up, and all the evidence Rachel had collected against him. She laid it all out for him. The next morning, Marcus Morrison descended on the hospital like a hurricane. He barged into Rachel's room just as she was attempting to breastfeed Hope for the very first time. Her body was still incredibly weak, and her mind was hazy from the medication. The baby wasn't latching, and Rachel was already crying from frustration when her husband suddenly appeared, standing over her bed with a furious look in his eyes. "You actually think you can leave me?" His voice was a venomous hiss, quiet enough to avoid being heard by the nurses in the hall, but sharp enough to wound. "You think your little website for teachers is going to scare me? I know everything now, Rachel. My mother told me absolutely everything." He moved in closer, so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. "I will ruin you in court. I will take Hope from you. My mother will testify that you are mentally unstable, that this pregnancy has broken your mind, and that you are an unfit mother. You will never lay eyes on your daughter again." Hospital security finally escorted him out 10 minutes later, after a nurse heard Rachel's sobs and came to check on her. But the harm was already done. All of her careful strategies, her detailed preparations, and her dreams of a decisive victory were completely destroyed by her mother-in-law's betrayal and her husband's uncontrollable anger. She cried for hours after he was gone. She just held Hope tightly and sobbed until she had no tears left. She cried until her eyes were swollen shut and her voice was gone, and the heart monitor next to her bed began to sound an alarm. That was the second catastrophe, the loss of her secrets, her advantage, and her element of surprise. The third was the most devastating of all. In the days that followed, Rachel's health took a sharp downturn. The doctors said it was an infection, but they seemed confused by how aggressive it was. They gave her powerful antibiotics, but her condition only got worse. Her fever climbed dangerously high, and her organs started to show signs of distress. Her recovery, which should have been moving forward, was now going in the opposite direction. I started to notice something strange during Diana's daily visits. She would arrive acting deeply concerned, bringing a special herbal tea from a wellness company in Connecticut. She insisted it would speed up Rachel's healing. "This is an old family recipe," Diana would say, pushing a hot mug into Rachel's trembling hands. "My grandmother swore by it. My mother used it. It contains healing properties you just cannot get from any modern medicine." Rachel would drink it just to be polite and to keep the peace. She wanted to avoid another argument when she felt too weak to defend herself. The night after Diana's third visit with the tea, Rachel's monitor began to shriek. "Code blue," a calm voice announced over the hospital's speaker system. "Crash cart to room 417. I was in the waiting room when the call went out, having dozed off in a horribly uncomfortable chair because I hadn't left the hospital in 3 days. I heard the announcement and a cold dread washed over me. I knew it had to be Rachel. I sprinted to her room and pressed my face to the window, watching in horror as a team of doctors and nurses surrounded her bed. Her heart had stopped beating. Her organs were shutting down. She was dying right there in front of me, and all I could do was stand there and pray. I prayed to a God I wasn't even sure I believed in anymore. They managed to bring her back twice. After the second time, they weren't confident she would make it through the night, but she did. She was a fighter. When she finally opened her eyes the next morning, I was right there by her bed, clutching her hand as if my touch alone could keep her anchored to this world. She looked at me with a startling clarity that cut through the haze of drugs and exhaustion. Then she spoke 3 words that changed the entire situation. "Diana is poisoning me." "Rachel," I began, about to dismiss her words as paranoia, brought on by the fever, as anything but the truth my own gut was screaming. "I saved the cup," Rachel said, her voice faint but firm. "The last cup of tea she brought me. It is inside the drawer of my nightstand. You have to get it tested, Claire. And make sure you get samples of my blood and hair from the hospital, with a documented chain of custody." She gripped my wrist with a surprising surge of strength. "I am not going to survive this. I can feel it, Claire. Whatever she is giving me is taking over, but I refuse to let them win. Not Diana, not Marcus, none of them." She made me swear to her that day. I had to promise to play the video she had recorded, to ensure everyone was watching when the truth was revealed, and to protect hope no matter what happened. I made those promises to her, and I meant every single word. I just had no idea, at the time, what it would cost me to keep them. Rachel was transferred to hospice care on a rainy Tuesday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Hope was born. The infection had spread, defeating every antibiotic the doctors had used. Her organs were failing in slow motion, shutting down one by one, like a beautiful machine slowly grinding to a halt. The doctors were completely stumped and frustrated. A healthy 32-year-old woman should not get this sick this fast, they kept saying. There has to be something we are not seeing. I knew exactly what they were missing. I had already sent the teacup to a private lab for analysis, paying for it with money from a secret emergency account Rachel had insisted I use. The results were going to take time that Rachel no longer had. But I knew deep down what they would find. Diana Morrison had been poisoning her own daughter-in-law, slowly and systematically, with the cold patience of someone who had been planning this for a very long time. Detective Sarah Brennan found me sitting in the hospital cafeteria the day before Rachel was moved to hospice. She was a tough-looking woman, 45 years old, with 20 years of experience on the force. She had that weathered face and those sharp eyes that come from seeing the worst of humanity and still finding a way to carry on. "I knew her mother," Brennan said, as she sat down across from me with a cup of coffee that looked like it had been brewed hours ago. "Betty Johnson. I worked a case at her diner many years ago, right after I graduated from the academy, back when I still thought I could change the world. She was the kindest woman I had ever met. Her daughter was too. from what I can recall. She took a long drink of the terrible coffee and looked at me closely. Something isn't right about this situation. Healthy young mothers do not just decline like this for no reason. The medical team is stumped, which usually means they are avoiding a possibility they really do not want to consider. What are you trying to say? I am saying that I am looking into this, quietly and off the record for now, until I can find something concrete. But if you know anything at all that could explain why a healthy young woman is dying, you need to tell me. In that hospital bed upstairs, you need to tell me now. I explained everything about the teacup, Diana's constant visits with her special herbal tea, and Rachel's certainty that her mother-in-law was trying to kill her. Brennan listened quietly, her face growing more serious with every detail betrayal. "Get me the lab report," she said as soon as I was done, and any other notes Rachel kept. "If my suspicion is correct, we are going to need every single piece of proof we can find." Rachel spent her final days in a hospice room that had a window overlooking a garden she was too frail to ever walk in again. The late afternoon sun poured through the glass, bathing everything in a warm, golden light. The machines beside her bed beeped in a soft, steady rhythm, counting down the little time she had left. I was there with her every day, holding her hand, talking about everything and nothing at all. Some days she was perfectly clear, her mind as sharp as ever, even through the haze of medication and her failing body. Other days, she would drift in and out, murmuring about butterflies, lesson plans, and a little girl named Hope she would never get to see grow up. The last time she was completely clear-headed, she had me renew my promise to her. "I wrote letters," she said, her voice so soft it was almost a whisper. "I wrote them for Hope, one for every birthday until she turns 18, for her first day of school, her first broken heart, her graduation, and even her wedding day." Tears started rolling down my face. "Rachel," I tried to say. But she gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me. "Let me finish. I wrote letters for all of it, for every moment I am going to miss, for everything I ever wanted to teach her. My words will be there for her, even when I can't be." She took a ragged breath, and I wrote other letters too, for Marcus, for Jessica, for Diana, a completely different kind of letter. The type of letter they won't be able to ignore, deny, or just pretend they never received. A faint smile touched her lips then, a look that was weak and sad, but still showed the fierce spirit that was so uniquely Rachel. "They believe I am dying defeated and broken. They think they won, that they got away with it all, that the girl from the trailer park finally got what was coming to her. They have absolutely no idea what is about to happen, Claire, not a clue. I spent the last 6 years building a $47 million empire while my husband assumed I was at home making worksheets about butterflies and the life cycle of frogs. I beat him in a game he never even realized he was playing. If that doesn't make me good wife material, I don't know what does." She gave a quiet laugh that turned into a cough, her small frame shaking from the effort. "Promise me you will play the video. Promise me that everyone will be there to see it, especially Diana, especially Marcus, and especially his little Instagram princess." "I promise," I told her, and I meant it with every part of my soul. "Promise me you will look after Hope, that you will raise her to be a strong woman. Tell her about me, the real me, not the victim they are going to try and paint me as. Tell her that I fought for her until my very last breath. I promise me that you will finish what I started. You will find a folder in Tom Whitmore's office. It is marked Phase 2. If Marcus ever tries to threaten Hope, if he ever dares to take what belongs to her, you open that folder and you burn his entire world to the ground. I promise, Rachel. I promise you all of it." She passed away at 3:47 in the morning on a cold Tuesday in October. I was the only person with her, holding her hand as the monitors went flat, and a deep silence fell over the room. The nurses came in and out. The hospice chaplain spoke words that I couldn't hear. Outside, the rain that had been falling all day finally let up, and the first trace of dawn started to brighten the dark sky. Her final words were a whisper so quiet I almost did not catch them. "Make them watch, Claire. Every last one of them. I plan on it," I whispered back, even though she was already gone. "I certainly plan on it." The lawyer, Thomas Whitmore, stood at the podium inside St. Andrew's Church, holding the envelope in his wrinkled hands. A crowd of 200 people held their collective breath, all waiting to find out what Rachel Morrison had left behind. Marcus was in the front row with Jessica right next to him, looking more irritated than worried. He clearly thought this was just a formality, a quick reading of a will that would simply leave him everything as the grieving husband. He had no clue what was about to unfold. I, Rachel Ann Morrison, being of sound mind and body, do hereby declare this document to be my last will and testament. Mr. Whitmore's voice was firm, and it carried clearly to every corner of the church. He read the introduction slowly, intentionally building the suspense in a way that made even me want to shout for him to just get to the point. And then he delivered the first shocking revelation, and the entire atmosphere changed. To my daughter, Hope Elizabeth Morrison, I leave all of my shares in IduSpark Digital, a company I founded and built from the ground up over the last 6 years. These shares will be held in a secure trust, which will be managed by my dear friend and sole trustee, Clare Bennett, until Hope turns 25 years old. He stopped for a moment to let the words sink in. At the time of my passing, IduSpark Digital was valued at $47 million. Current financial forecasts predict the company's value will grow to $80 million within the next 2 years. A loud gasp echoed through the church. Marcus's head shot up, his look of boredom instantly replaced by confusion, which then twisted into something that looked like pure terror. "That is not possible," he said, loud enough for the whole church to hear. "She sold teaching plans online. She made maybe $200 a month." Mr. Whitmore looked down at him with the kind of patient disdain a teacher might have for a student who just isn't very bright. Mrs. Morrison was the sole owner and chief executive officer of IduSpark Digital, the single largest platform for independent teacher resources in the United States. The company was founded before you were married and was structured within a trust that ensured it was completely separate from any marital assets. You were not aware of its existence because Mrs. Morrison made the choice not to tell you. Diana Morrison jumped to her feet. "This is fraud." She was hiding assets from her husband. "That is illegal." "It is perfectly legal," Mr. Whitmore answered calmly. "The company was started before the marriage. All of its growth was financed by its own revenue, not with money from the marriage. I have 6 years of documentation that proves Mrs. Morrison built this business on her own, without a single penny from Mr. Morrison. I suggest you sit down, Mrs. Morrison." Diana did not sit. She just stood there, trembling with fury, until Marcus finally yanked her back down into the pew. Marcus tried to regain his composure. I watched him physically pull himself together, adjusting his tie and schooling his features into a calmer expression. "Fine," he said. "Whatever. As Hope's father, I will be the one to manage her trust until she is an adult. The money will stay within the family." Mr. Whitmore did not even blink. "I have not finished, Mr. Morrison, and I think the next part will address your assumption regarding parental rights." He clicked a button on a small remote, and a large screen lowered from the ceiling behind the coffin. Rachel's face filled the screen, filmed from her hospice bed only days before she died. She looked awful, so thin and pale, with dark circles beneath her eyes. Her body was clearly giving out, but her eyes were bright and fierce, with an almost playful look that made my heart ache with both pride and sadness. "Hello, Marcus." Her voice was faint but came clearly through the church speakers. "Jessica, Diana, if you are seeing this, it means I am gone, and you are all probably feeling very pleased with yourselves right now." She let the silence hang in the air, surprised about the money, of course. "But you are already thinking you will figure it out. You assume you will get custody of Hope, take control of the trust, and find some legal loophole that your overpriced lawyers missed. You think you have won. You always think you have won, because people like you can't even comprehend a world where someone like me could possibly outsmart you." She paused again. A small smile appeared that sent a chill down my spine. "You have no idea what is coming, so I suggest you sit down, shut your mouths, and listen closely. Class is now in session." The video played on, and with every word Rachel spoke, the world that Marcus, Jessica, and Diana had built for themselves started to crack. "Jessica," Rachel said, "I want to thank you. I know how odd that must sound, but just listen. When I first discovered you were having an affair with my husband, I was completely shattered. I think I cried for 3 days straight. I felt like my life was over, that everything I had worked so hard for had been ruined by a 28-year-old social media influencer who couldn't respect the boundaries of another woman's marriage." She paused, and her smile became razor sharp. "But then, I got angry. And after I got angry, I got smart. When I started to look into all of Marcus's little secrets, I mean really look, I stumbled upon something fascinating about my own life, something I had never even thought to question before." Documents flashed on the screen behind her, official-looking DNA test results with lab letterhead and clinical data. "Marcus, Hope is not your daughter." The church erupted into chaos. People were shouting, gasping, and jumping out of their seats. Marcus's face turned as white as a sheet of paper, his mouth hanging open as he struggled to make a sound. "I had an affair too," Rachel's voice continued, steady and calm above the noise. "It was just one time, 3 years ago, right after I found out about your first big gambling debt. The one you swore to me was a one-time mistake. I met someone at an education conference who treated me with kindness, who saw me as a person instead of some trophy or a project to fix, who actually listened to what I had to say instead of just waiting for his own turn to speak." She gave a slight shrug on the screen. "I am not proud of it. I was brought up to believe that marriage vows meant something, but I am not sorry for it either. The DNA test results are attached to my will, and they have been witnessed and notarized. You have no biological claim to Hope, no parental rights, and no legal claim to custody. The man who actually fathered her will be contacted by my attorney. The choice of whether to be involved in her life will be up to him and my daughter, and them alone." Marcus looked like he was about to be sick. Beside him, Jessica had gone completely still, the color draining from her perfectly made-up face. Now for Diana, my dear mother-in-law. Diana flinched as if she had been slapped. Her composure finally cracked, revealing something truly ugly underneath. "Detective Brennan," Rachel said, "I know you are here. I personally asked Tom to invite you." I watched as Brennan moved through the crowd, her badge already in hand. Her expression was the professional, blank mask of someone who knew this moment was coming. "I believe Diana Morrison has been poisoning me," Rachel continued. "It was in the herbal tea she brought to my hospital room every single day. I saved the last cup. It is currently being held as evidence by my attorney, Mr. Whitmore, with a fully documented chain of custody." Diana tried to stand up, to move toward the aisle, but Brennan was there first, blocking her path with a casual and practiced ease. "I also saved samples of my own blood and hair from the hospital," Rachel said, "also documented, and also held as evidence. The test results should be coming back any day now. I suspect they will show high levels of thallium, a heavy metal that mimics the symptoms of natural illness and is nearly impossible to detect without very specific testing. Diana's voice shot up to a screech. This is insane! She was paranoid. The pregnancy must have affected her mind. I never poisoned anyone! On the screen, Rachel seemed to have anticipated this exact outburst. Diana will probably say I was mentally unstable, paranoid, or delusional. But I was a straight-A student, a national merit scholar. I built a $47 million company while everyone around me thought I was just making worksheets about butterflies. Does that sound like a person who has lost her grip on reality? The third bombshell hit like a physical blow. Marcus, let us talk about your work. Let's talk about the $2.3 million in gambling debts you owe to some very unpleasant people in Atlantic City. And let's discuss the embezzlement you have been committing at Morrison and Associates to cover those debts. Documents suddenly flashed across the screen. There were bank records, wire transfers, and betting slips. It was a paper trail that snaked through shell companies and offshore accounts, all of it perfectly documented and explained. I have already sent copies of everything to the SEC, the FBI, the IRS, and your firm's ethics board. By Monday morning, you will no longer have a law license. By Friday, you will probably be in handcuffs. And as for those gentlemen in Atlantic City who have been waiting so patiently for their money, they will be very interested to learn that their debtor has no way to pay them back. Marcus was shaking now, a visible tremor running through his body as sweat broke out on his forehead. His $3,000 suit suddenly looked like a cheap costume that no longer fit him. But Rachel was not done yet. Oh, and Jessica, one more thing, sweetheart. Jessica, who had been trying to slowly inch away from Marcus, froze where she stood. I know you have been selling Marcus's insider trading secrets to Greg Holloway, his biggest rival in business. I have the emails, the Venmo payments, and the text messages where you called Marcus a useful idiot who is too arrogant to realize he is being played. The screen showed a text conversation. Jessica's face completely crumbled. Marcus, your mistress has been destroying your career from the inside while you were busy trying to destroy me. She has been working for your enemy this entire time, feeding him every single piece of valuable information you were foolish enough to share with her. You actually thought she loved you. She just thought you were a stepping stone to something better. I suppose that makes you two perfect for each other. Marcus spun toward Jessica, his eyes filled with rage. You were working for Greg? Jessica's composure completely shattered. Marcus, I can explain. It was not like that. I was just protecting myself in case things went south. You were selling my information. I could go to prison because of you. Oh, that is just rich. Jessica's voice rose to a shriek. You are the one who embezzled all that money. You are the one with massive gambling debts. I just made sure I would be taken care of when you eventually screwed everything up. They screamed at each other right there in the front pew of the church, while 200 people watched and dozens of phones recorded their every word. My best friend's funeral had just turned into the most dramatic reality show any of them had ever seen. Never underestimate a quiet woman, Rachel's voice said from the screen, cutting right through the chaos. Still waters do not just run deep. Sometimes they are hiding a tsunami, and sometimes that tsunami has spent 6 years learning exactly where all the fault lines are. Police cars pulled up to St. Andrew's Church less than 20 minutes after Rachel's video ended. Detective Brennan had called for backup before the second bombshell even dropped, because she knew what was coming. She was ready to act on 6 years of carefully documented evidence. Diana Morrison was escorted out of the church in handcuffs, her screams echoing off the high, vaulted ceilings. She tried to use her family name, her lawyers, her connections in Connecticut society. None of it made a difference. The officer guiding her toward the squad car looked completely unimpressed by her protests. "I have rights," Diana shrieked. "I want my attorney. This is defamation. That woman was insane. I never poisoned anyone." The lab results came back 2 days later. It was thallium, just as Rachel had predicted. It was a slow-acting poison that builds up in the body over time, mimicking the symptoms of infection and organ failure. Diana had been giving it to her daughter-in-law for weeks, maybe even months, with the cold precision of someone who had planned out every last detail. She would spend the rest of her life in prison. Marcus was served with federal subpoenas before he even had a chance to leave the church. The SEC, the FBI, the IRS. His firm fired him by the end of the business day, putting out a press release that called him a disgrace to his profession and a total embarrassment to the legal community. His assets were immediately frozen, pending the investigation. The tickets to Costa Rica he had stashed in his desk drawer would never be used. The gambling creditors came looking for him 3 days later. Marcus had been denied bail because he was a flight risk. So he was safely in federal custody when two very large men showed up at his empty apartment demanding their money. They left disappointed, but they were not giving up. Men like that have very long memories. Jessica Crane was arrested on 17 counts of insider trading, conspiracy to commit securities fraud, and being an accessory to financial crimes. Her mugshot went viral in a matter of hours. Her mascara was running, her hair was a mess, and her designer dress was wrinkled from her time in the holding cell. Her Instagram followers dropped from 87,000 to less than 8,000 overnight. The comments were brutal. This is what happens when you trade your morals for a married man. Imagine losing everything for a guy who was already losing it all. She really thought she was the main character. Plot twist, she was the cautionary tale. I watched all of this happen from the sidelines, feeling a strange mix of victory and sadness. Rachel had won. She had outsmarted everyone who had ever looked down on her. And she had done it from beyond the grave. But she was still gone, and no amount of justice could ever bring her back. 2 weeks after the funeral, Greg Holloway got in touch with me through attorney Whitmore. When we met, he seemed nervous, fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that did not match the ruthless businessman Marcus had always made him out to be. He was 40 years old, successful, and well-dressed, in a way that suggested wealth without shouting about it. But it was his eyes that really got my attention. They were kind and genuine, and they were filled with the same kind of grief that I was feeling. "I loved her," he said, his voice quiet. "Rachel. We only had 3 months together, but I really loved her. She was the most incredible woman I had ever met. She was smart and strong and funny, and she had no idea just how extraordinary she really was." He looked down at his hands. She did not want to leave Marcus at first. She thought she could fix their marriage, that she could save it somehow. She kept saying that she had made a commitment, that she had to try everything she could before giving up. By the time she finally realized the marriage could not be saved, she was pregnant, and then everything just started falling apart. He showed me a photograph. It was Rachel on a beach somewhere, laughing at the camera with her hair blowing in the wind. She looked happier than I had seen her in years, maybe happier than I had ever seen her. "I did not know about hope," Greg said, "not until the funeral and the DNA test. Rachel never told me she was pregnant with my child. I think she was just trying to protect me. Or maybe she was trying to protect herself. She knew Marcus would destroy her if he ever found out." He looked up at me, and his eyes were glistening with tears. "I want to be a part of Hope's life. I want to help raise her and give her everything Rachel would have wanted her to have. It is not because of the money or the inheritance or any of that. It is because she is my daughter, and because loving her is the only way I have left to love her mother. I studied him from across the table. This man that Rachel had chosen, even if it was just for a short time, even if it was in secret, I saw what she must have seen in him. He had a kindness and an authenticity. He was someone real in a world that was full of men like Marcus Morrison. Hope needs a father, I said after a moment. She needs someone who will love her for exactly who she is, not for what she represents. Can you be that person for her? Yes, he said, without any hesitation. I can. I will. I promise you, Claire. I kept my promise to Rachel. In the weeks that followed, we settled on a plan for joint custody. I would be Hope's legal guardian, while Greg was formally named her biological father. He took care of everything a child could ever want, setting up trusts and college funds. What meant more, though, was that he was there every single day. He learned how to change diapers, mix bottles, and sing the lullabies that sent Hope to sleep. He was not just fulfilling an obligation, he truly wanted to be a father. And that is when a small part of me started to believe that we were going to be all right. A full year went by. Life stubbornly pushed on, even when my own grief made each day feel like a struggle. I took the bar exam and passed on the first attempt. Now I was a licensed attorney, fueled by Rachel's memory and a sense of purpose I had never known. As Hope's guardian, the trust provided me with a salary. It was enough to stop worrying about rent and start building the kind of future Rachel would have wanted for us. Hope was doing wonderfully. She was a happy, healthy 1-year-old who had her mother's eyes and Greg's warm, easy smile. She found joy in everything, laughing and reaching for the world with a pure happiness that made me understand why Rachel fought so hard to protect her. My own daughter, Lily, who was now 9 years old, decided she was Hope's official big sister. She would read stories to her at night, help out with bath time, and tell anyone who would listen that her baby sister was the smartest and most beautiful baby in the whole world. To be nearer to us, Greg had relocated to New York. He even rented an apartment just 2 floors above me in my own building, close enough for him to be a constant in Hope's life, without crowding the unique little family we were creating. Greg and I were not in a romantic relationship. Our bond was something different, perhaps even stronger. We were partners in the single most important job either of us would ever have. Edgewood Park was still expanding, now valued at $80 million, and it was projected to hit $100 million within the next year. Rachel had personally selected the new CEO, leaving behind meticulous instructions for the company's direction. She also established an endowment to fund scholarships for the children of single mothers for many generations. It was named the Betty Johnson Scholarship Fund, a tribute to the woman who spent her life working so her daughter could have chances she never did. Betty was now living comfortably in a new house in Tennessee, all paid for by the trust. She had finally been able to retire from the diner, to stop working double shifts, and to finally have time for her garden and for video calls with her granddaughter every Sunday afternoon. We kept Hope's first birthday party small, but it was absolutely perfect. My entire apartment was filled with pink balloons, a banner that Lily had enthusiastically crafted with uneven letters spelling out Happy First Birthday Hope, hung on the wall. There were only a handful of guests, but they were the most important people. Lily, Greg, Betty, and Tom Whitmore, the people who had loved Rachel and would now love her daughter for her. As everyone got settled, I rolled a small television into the living room. I explained that Rachel had left videos for Hope, one for every major life event: her first birthday, her first day of school, her first heartbreak, her graduation, and even her wedding day. Rachel wanted me to play them for her. A hush fell over the room. Then Rachel's face filled the screen. She was clearly in her hospice bed, but she had put on lipstick and fixed her hair, trying to look like her old self, even as her body was failing her. You could see the medical equipment in the background, the tubes and monitors that defined her last days, but she had framed the shot to push them to the side. That was so typical of Rachel, always concerned with how things looked, right up to the very end. "My darling Hope," she began, and her voice was fragile, but full of a warmth and love that the recording could not diminish. "Happy first birthday, baby girl. If you are watching this, it means I am not there to hold you, or kiss your cheeks, or watch you smear cake all over your face and laugh at the wonderful mess you have made." She smiled then, and for a brief second, she looked almost healthy, almost like the Rachel I had known for 25 years. "I am so sorry that I could not stay. I fought so hard. Hope, harder than I have ever fought for anything. But some battles just cannot be won, at least not in the way we want them to be. Sometimes, being a fighter means knowing when it is time to let go, and trusting the people you love to carry on the work you started." Her eyes shone with emotion, but she did not let a single tear fall. Rachel was always so much stronger than anyone ever realized. "I need you to know something important. Everything I ever accomplished, everything that truly mattered, I did it all for you. I did not build a company because I loved money or success, or even because I enjoyed proving people wrong. Although I have to admit, that part was satisfying. I built it to protect you. I knew there would be people in this world who would try to take what belongs to you, who would look at you and only see an opportunity for themselves. I wanted you to have armor. I wanted you to have resources and independence. I wanted to make sure you would never have to depend on anyone else to survive, so that when you choose to let people into your heart, it will be because you want them there, not because you have no other choice." She paused, taking a shaky breath. "Be brave, Hope, and be kind and be smart. Work hard, but never so hard that you forget how to laugh. Love with all your heart, but never so much that you lose who you are. Always stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. Question everything, especially when people tell you not to ask questions. And Hope, there is one more thing. It is the most important thing I will ever tell you." Her eyes locked onto the camera lens, staring right at us, right through the screen, across time and death itself. "Never, ever let a single person tell you that you are nothing without them. You are everything. You are my everything. You are the daughter of Rachel Morrison, and that means you have a strength inside you that no one, not even you, can imagine. I will love you forever and always, no matter what happens, no matter how much distance is between us. Happy birthday, sweetheart." And then the video was over. The room was filled with tears. Betty held a tissue to her face, her shoulders shaking as she sobbed. Greg hugged Hope tightly, his own cheeks wet with tears, whispering something softly into her hair. Even Tom Whitmore, a man I had only ever seen show mild, professional interest, was dabbing his eyes with the corner of a handkerchief. Lily buried her face into my side, wrapping her arms tightly around my waist. "She is not really gone, is she, Mama?" she asked. I pulled her in closer and said, "No, baby. As long as Hope has these videos, she is not gone at all." A letter showed up at my new law office just 3 days later. It had no return address, but the postmark was from the federal prison where Marcus was waiting for his trial. My hands were steady as I opened it. Nothing he could possibly say could hurt me, or Rachel, or the future we had built from the wreckage of his betrayal. "Claire," the letter began, "this is not over. My lawyers are looking into the DNA evidence. Something does not feel right. And as soon as I prove Hope is my daughter, I am coming for custody. I am coming for the trust. and I am coming for every last thing Rachel stole from me. See you in court, Marcus. I suppose I should have been scared. A year before, a letter like that would have thrown me into a complete panic. But I had spent the last 12 months learning to think like Rachel. I learned to plan for every possibility, to gather arsenals of information, and to be ready for this exact moment. I picked up the phone. Tom, it is Clare. He sent a letter. Yes, he is threatening to fight for custody. I know. Rachel was ready for this. I slid open the top drawer of my desk. Inside, there was a thick folder I had never touched. Labeled in Rachel's neat handwriting, Phase 2, if he threatens Hope, open only if necessary. I broke the seal and started to read. There were documents, photos, audio recordings, and a USB drive marked insurance. And tucked inside was a handwritten note from my best friend, written during the last weeks of her life. Claire, it said, if you are reading this, it means Marcus is still trying to fight. Some men just never learn. They get knocked down, but they get right back up and keep swinging, not because they actually think they can win, but because fighting is the only way they know how to live. Phase 1 was the funeral, the public revelations, his arrest, the complete humiliation. I was hoping that would be enough. I really hoped he would just crawl away and leave Hope alone. But I knew him, Claire. I knew him better than anyone else did, even better than he knows himself. And that is why I prepared Phase 2. He has absolutely no idea what I discovered during those 6 years I spent documenting every one of his crimes, what I saved, what I held back, just for this moment. He thinks the funeral was the end of it. He believes I played all my cards. He is so wrong. Finish him, Claire. Do it for me, for Hope, and for every woman who was ever told she was nothing without the very man who was tearing her apart. Love always, Rachel. P.S. Tell Hope her mama says hi, and tell Marcus, checkmate. A smile spread across my face, the same confident, fierce, and ready smile that Rachel wore in her video. Oh, Rachel, I whispered to myself, you brilliant, terrifying, and absolutely magnificent woman, how many more surprises did you leave behind for me? I began to go through the contents of the folder. There were names and dates, evidence of crimes that made the things revealed at the funeral look like minor traffic violations. It was more than enough ammunition to lock Marcus away for decades, to completely shatter what was left of his reputation, and to guarantee he would never be a threat to Hope or anyone else ever again. Outside my office window, the city stretched out in every direction, millions of individual lives playing out their own personal stories. Somewhere in government custody, Marcus Morrison was likely patting himself on the back for his threatening letter, believing he still had some control, some moves to make, some kind of a chance. He was deeply mistaken. Rachel had made certain of that. I pulled out my phone to dial Tom Whitmore, to set Phase 2 into motion, to complete what my best friend had started. Justice is patient, I thought, thinking of the words that appeared on the screen at the end of Rachel's memorial service. But she never forgets. And neither would I. And that is the story of how Rachel Morrison, a woman that everyone had completely misjudged, a woman they called trashy and dull and nothing without her husband, proved every single one of them wrong from beyond the grave. She taught us all something very important that day. Never misjudge a quiet woman. Never believe that being silent is the same as being weak. And never, ever think that money and status can shield you from the consequences of your own cruelty. If this story touched you, if it made you feel angry or hopeful, or if it reminded you of your own resilience, I want to hear from you. Post a comment below and tell me, what would you have done if you were in Rachel's shoes? Would you have fought for justice the same way she did? And if you have someone in your life who needs to hear this story today, someone who might feel trapped or powerless, or like they have no other choice, please share this with them. Sometimes a story is the one thing a person needs to remember how strong they really are. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Because here on this channel, we believe in justice, we believe in karma, and we believe that the quietest people are always the ones you need to watch out for the most. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. I will see you in the next story. Before you go, remember this. Rachel's story is not just about revenge. It is about knowing your worth when everyone around you tries to convince you that you have none. It is about playing the long game when the world expects you to break. And it is about building your own power quietly, patiently, and strategically until the day you are ready to use it. If this story gave you strength, if it reminded you that you are more powerful than anyone has ever given you credit for, drop a comment below and tell me, what would you have done in Rachel's shoes? Hit that like button if you believe in karma. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. And subscribe with notifications on, because we have more stories coming that will remind you exactly how strong you really are. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and inspiration. Every story we tell is crafted to empower you,